Alrighty, folks, so you may have noticed that Hollywood continues to drift away from the rest of the country. They are just going to produce now stuff that is directed at your politics, and they're going to talk about how wonderful they are. Well, today, we're going to go over some of the most divisive movies, splitting the critics and the audience straight down the center, because the audience is like you, and the critics are a bunch of elitists who really don't like you. This is why you should head over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Okay, so let us jump right in. So we have a list here of a bunch of movies that the critics absolutely love and that audiences did not. Because the fact remains that the critics are completely out of touch with American audiences. They are all drawn from the same substrata of American life. These are all people who went to Ivy League colleges and who speak the vocabulary. And so all of their movie viewing is through this lens. And so they understand all of the politics of the films that they are being asked to cover. So we're also going to be talking about some of these movies where the critics absolutely hated it, but the audience loves it. And again, it very often comes down to a divide in values. By the way, great example of a movie where critics hated it, but the audience really liked it, Hillbilly Elegy, which we've talked about in the past. Again, that was all about the left despising the book and feeling that people who are Trump voters simply should not be understood. So any film made about those people must inherently be a very, very bad film. Okay, so let's jump into some of these big divides. Let's start with Captain Marvel. So on Tomato Meter, has a 79% positive review. The audience score for this thing is like 46%. Now, I'll be honest with you, I didn't hate Captain Marvel. I didn't think it was like awful, but it is pretty obvious that this divide is mainly over the quote-unquote importance of Captain Marvel. Every time there is a superhero film that features a quote-unquote victimized group, the media just go crazy over it. For example, even movies I like, they do this. Wonder Woman, a movie I enjoyed. This became the most important statement on female empowerment ever in the history of the world. Patty Jenkins had directed. It was like Citizen Kane. It was the greatest. And they did the same thing with Captain Marvel, which is a significantly worse movie than Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is actually a pretty good movie. Captain Marvel is kind of drecky. It's just like, meh. She's an unlikable character. Brie Larson is not charming in any way. Her character is radically uninteresting because she is magical, right? I mean, she can literally do anything. She has no limits on her powers. The critics love this, of course, and they also love the subtle messaging. So there's the not so subtle messaging, which is women power, woo! In fact, there's a scene in this movie in which Captain Marvel basically physically abuses a normal man for telling her to smile. And the critics are like, oh, that's amazing, that's amazing. So let me just get this straight. If a guy says something sexist, the proper answer is physical violence done by somebody of superior physical force. I feel like that could lead to some bad things. In any case, there is a sample critic review, Monique Jones of Shadow and Act. The scrolls also provide the film with a chance to inject a subtle dig at today's politics surrounding immigration. Whereas the Skrulls were painted as an invasive species by the Kree, it turns out the Kree are the ones who want to build walls and turn families into refugees. The switcheroo should give the audience a moment of reflection, since in our political realm, the President of the United States unfairly paints immigrants and refugees as violent invaders from bleep hole countries. Overall, Captain Marvel is a film you should be proud to let your children watch. Oh, wow, that's... And the audience, meanwhile, is like, meh. They weren't like, we hate it. It was like 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. We're like, it's not really good. Movie number 2, where you see a vast gap between the critics and the audience. And this one is one of my personal bugaboos. Star Wars The Last Jedi. Absolute crap. Whereas Captain Marvel is like a passable piece of B- entertainment, Star Wars The Last Jedi takes all of your childhood memories and just wrecks them. So I had problems with The Force Awakens. The Last Jedi is even worse. It takes Luke and turns him into a whiny basically, sitting around on a planet, doing nothing, and milking aliens all day. That's the entire plot of the film. Meanwhile, we have a secondary plot about class warfare and animal rights on some random gambling island that has nothing to do with anything. And we have a third plot, a tertiary plot, in which a space maneuver is used that completely destroys all space battles ever in the Star Wars universe, right? I mean, like, if you could do the Holdo maneuver in any space battle, there is no Death Star battle in Star Wars Episodes 4 or Star Wars Episode 6. You just aim an X-Wing at the center of the Death Star and you're done. Right? That's pretty much the whole thing. In any case, it's a dumb movie. It's a bad movie. It's like a legit bad movie, The Last Jedi. And that doesn't mean it's not beautifully shot. It is beautifully shot. And there's one good lightsaber battle. And that's pretty much all I have to say for Last Jedi. I'm not the only one saying this, right? Like, everyone who watched The Last Jedi in the audience is like, this is not a good movie. This is a very bad movie. And yet, the critics loved the movie. And more importantly, the critics were very, very angry at the audience for not liking the movie. It was not just that the critics liked the movie, because it broke stereotypical molds and all this kind of stuff. And it brought in characters like Rose that nobody has ever cared about. Like, Rose is just a bad character. And my favorite is like, yeah, the audience hates Rose because she's female. Well, the audience was pretty cool with Princess Leia, who's like maybe the most central figure in all of the Star Wars canon in the original 3 films, right? The entire plot is built around saving Princess Leia in 1. The entire plot is built around Princess Leia and Han Solo in 2. And then in 3, Princess Leia and Luke's relationship comes to the fore. So somehow everybody was okay with Princess Leia. It's just we don't like Rose because she's unbelievably boring and why are we wasting time on her? But then it was like, oh, you're sexist because you don't like Rose, right? This is where you got the toxic fandom crap, where it's like, oh, if you don't like a piece of entertainment, you're going to attribute it to the evil Trump voting nature of your audience or some such nonsense. I'm sorry that The Last Jedi is bad. It's just not a good movie. I mean, tough. Okay, the media, meanwhile, were like, yeah, this is great. It's great. No, it was not. It was not. Okay. Passengers was another one of these movies that the critics wildly over-politicized. So there is a Chris Pratt backlash that has happened over the last few years because Chris Pratt, of course, is a conservative. And so people in the media will not allow Chris Pratt to have a critically acclaimed film. They just won't allow it to happen because he's not overtly conservative, but he goes to a church. And because he goes to a church, this means he's a conservative. That's just the way that it works in Hollywood. In Hollywood, the way that they think of Jesus is as Jesus, a guy who does their gardening. Because everyone named Jesus in Hollywood is considered a person who does your gardening. Because everybody in Hollywood is tacitly racist against Latinos. I'm not kidding about that. That's an actual thing. Yeah, I live in Hollywood. And I used to live in Hollywood anyway. And this is why you see so many Hollywood people who are like, yeah, you know, illegal immigration is good because I need a garden. Like, people will say that kind of stuff. Okay, in any case, Passengers is not a bad movie. Passengers is an okay movie. It is not a bad movie. It's about Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt, and they are traveling through space. And it's sort of this slow romance. It was pitched as sort of an action film, so part of the problem is that it was pitched badly. But the film is really about he wakes up early on this trans-galactic journey, and he's the only person who's woken up. And so he decides that he's going to wake somebody else up because otherwise he's basically going to commit suicide. So he wakes her up. She falls in love with him and then gets over it. And not to be a spoiler, but this movie came out in 2016. They end up together. They don't end up living all the way to the ship reaching its destination, but they end up like making sure that the ship actually runs the way it's supposed to run so that it doesn't fall apart and they save everybody who's on the ship, right? Because the ship is having all sorts of technical malfunctions. This was considered, for some reason, like a rape culture movie. That's what Teen Vogue said. Brianna Weiss said, throughout the lead up to the movie, trailers and previews framed Jim and Aurora's situation to seem like a random act of fate in which both characters wake up in a suspended time-space reality. However, their companionship was a deliberate, non-consensual act done out of one man's sheer desperation, loneliness, obsession, and longing. Okay, and that ends up as a pretty major plot point in the film, right? I mean, Jennifer Lawrence at a certain point is informed that he woke her up, and this becomes sort of a major plot point. Then the question is, will she forgive him? And I think people are just angry she did, because for some reason, being continuously rageful is supposed to be a solution in intergalactic space when the only other person awake within, light years is a person who did something bad to you. So forgiveness is apparently bad. Producer Neil Moritz said there was a weird thing that happened. We'd done numerous test screening that were very encouraging. Everything was looking great. 10 days before the movie came out, the first review came out. The reviewer said we were justifying date rape. And I was like, what? I thought back to all the screenings we had. Nobody had ever thought that, but it was weird. One guy said it. A lot of the media picked up on it and became the mantra the film carried. I thought it was a really unfair thing. I think it's a beautiful film I couldn't be more proud of. Yeah, there's no question that that is what happened. This thing became political. Okay, another movie, Midway. Tomato meter has it at 41%. Audience score has it at 92%. It is a perfectly fine, wrote by numbers, World War II film that does a good job of exploiting what happened at the Battle of the Midway and in surrounding battles. I wouldn't say it's like an A+ film. I would say it's like a B film. Okay, but the critics absolutely despised it. And I think one of the reasons that the critics despised it is because it didn't do this whole, both sides were bad, both sides were terrible. Midway basically says, no, the Americans were good and the Japanese were kind of not good in the Battle of the Midway, which is accurate. You're allowed to portray Americans as heroes in World War II, for goodness sake. But a lot of members of the media were upset about that. Right? According to Roxana Haddadi for Pajiba, Midway has all the other components you would expect from a World War II movie, like a wife left behind and brief glimpses behind enemy lines. I was surprised, actually, by how much screen time was given to the Japanese engineers of the war and to the fact the film was dedicated to both American and Japanese soldiers. Midway makes sure, though, that every American is provided moments of heroism, while the Japanese are mostly just there as screaming, mocking villains who jeer at the American pilots before they are killed. But that, too, feels like part of the political game Midway is playing. The idea the world was better back then because of men like Dick Best, men who were straightforward in their whiteness and their straightness and their Americanness. Oh, so tiresome. Okay, which brings us to another woke favorite, Ghostbusters, like female Ghostbusters. So nobody ever saw the original Ghostbusters, which is basically a male buddy comedy, and thought, you know what? This would be a better movie with ladies. What we need are ladies in Ghostbusters, in overtly male film. I mean, it's a very male film, the original Ghostbusters. It's like Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, come on. And then they're like, you know what if we made them all women and made the film utterly unamusing? What if we did that? And then we scolded everyone who didn't like the film. So it has 74% on Tomato Meter. The audience score is 50%. So naturally, whenever people don't like something the critics love, it's because the audience is not woke enough and they're bad and they're terrible and toxic fandom and all of that. It is a bad movie. It is a not funny movie. Paul Feig directed the movie. I don't dislike all of his movies. I think that Bridesmaids is okay. It's all right. In fact, he's made a couple of sort of off-brand movies. He made one with Sandra Bullock that was kind of funny. But for some reason, this one became like the cause celeb of the day. That if you didn't like if you did not dictate that this was like the greatest film in human history, this is because you hated ladies or something. Sion Brett, One Room with a View, said, getting to see 4 normal-looking women on screen of all shapes, sizes, and colors is rare, let alone seeing them be action heroes who save the day. And Ghostbusters isn't preachy about it at all. It presents the fact that they're women as entirely normal, which might be the most revolutionary thing of all. No, Ghostbusters is pretty preachy about it. Snappy jokes, kick-ass women, a great fight sequence, all make Ghostbusters a fun-as-hell blockbuster, which you don't want to miss. Oh, yeah, no, audiences found it tiresome. They're right to find it tiresome. It's tiresome. Other movies that the critics absolutely loved and that the audience absolutely hated. Cuties has a tomato meter score of 87%. The audience score is 15%, and it led to a mass drop-off by people on Netflix. Like, people were like, we are not going to patronize a service that somehow thinks that distributing films that lasciviously show 11-year-old girls twerking is a good idea. And by the way, there's no question that's what the film does. I have seen the film, Cuties. I think I know what the director was trying to do. She actually was attempting to critique this, but in the process of critiquing this, it was too sophisticated for the audience in some ways, and I think far beyond what it had to be in order to make the critique. Basically, the idea was that in a world without proper role models, in a secular France without proper role models, you end up trapped as a person between sort of the sex-based internet lifestyle, and the main character is a Muslim girl, and a fundamentalist Muslim lifestyle that is also not compatible with freedom. So I think actually the critique that it's making is sort of a Michelle Houellebecq critique, and I think it's kind of right. But the problem is that the movie, in order to make the critique, decides that it is worthwhile to gaze longingly at the posteriors of small children, which is just, yeah. And the critics were very upset that anybody would find fault with this. Beth Webb of Empire Magazine says, Cuties is a thematically bold yet nuanced study of displacement and duty that deserves to be seen as an auspicious and astute debut, not the source of scandal. Well, I mean, you can see why people thought it was a scandal. Honestly, I think that Netflix's marketing did this film no favors because they actively promoted this as like a fun romp in which young preteen girls were being portrayed as sex objects. So I'm with the audience, in other words. Another movie in which the critics loved it and the audience really did not. This would be Sausage Party. And this entire thing is just a referendum on how terrible religion is, and it ends with an orgy by food. Like, it's all simulated sex rituals involving food. It's a bunch of dick jokes, basically. My producers just forced me to rewatch the orgy scene at the end of Sausage Party. So again, the entire premise of the film is that it is a bunch of food items who are thinking about whether they're going to get to heaven, and then it turns out there is no heaven because this is an atheist film about how heaven doesn't exist, and so you're best off just engaging in raunchy sex acts with presumably food items of either gender or no gender at all. So that is exciting stuff. The media loved it, of course, because anytime you make a movie about how heaven doesn't exist and religious people are stupid and the solution to this is raunchy sex, the media are into that message. Right? Hedonism is their bag. Nigel Andrews. It's funny, nonstop inventive, and heroically heretical. Yeah, it's super heroic, guys. Nothing says heroism quite like taking the same pagan vision that has been experienced by cultures across time and does not build civilizations, and then pushing that on film in a format that is very often sort of, it's an animated film, so half directed at children. Good stuff there. Alison Skornick Rose for Flick Direct. Sausage Party is appallingly offensive just when you think they can't possibly go there. They go there. They insult everyone and anyone and leave no stereotype unturned. The characters curse like a bunch of sailors in a swearing contest, and the food orgy at the end makes you feel like you're a banana cream pie at a Weight Watchers meeting. Of course, you have to have your moral compass checked, so there's an underlying message of equality and make love, literally not war. It also needed to bring everyone together to fight a common enemy, and this movie found it. The common enemy, of course, being religion. So, solid stuff. I can't imagine why the audience didn't like it, but the critics did. We're going to jump into the movies that the audience loved, but the critics hated in just 1 second. First, as part of our Daily Wire audience, you get to enjoy our content in a bunch of different ways, whether it's through our app, dailywire.com, or over at Apple TV and Roku. If you haven't downloaded the Roku or Apple TV app yet, you definitely will want to do that so you can enjoy our podcasts on your TV, as well as all of our additional content being added to Daily Wire. That includes the entire PragerU catalog, including all the 5-minute videos, Man on the Street with Will Witt, the Book Club with Michael Knowles. We're also launching a brand new show with Candace Owens next year in front of a live studio audience. You're going to want to watch that on your big screen. You have to be an Insider member to watch. Head Head on over to dailywire.com/Shapiro. Use code WATCH at checkout. Get 20% off your membership purchase. The deal won't last long. Act fast if you want live shows on your big screen, plus one-of-a-kind, highly coveted, never duplicated leftist tears tumbler. Again, that is dailywire.com/Shapiro to get 20% off with code WATCH. Download the Daily Wire app on your Apple TV and Roku today. Okay, now let's go to one of my childhood favorites. If you grew up in the 90s, this was a seminal film for you. And that, of course, was Hook, right? This huge budget film with Robin Williams and, what's her name, Julia Roberts. Maggie Smith is in it, and Dustin Hoffman. And the movie's overlong, for sure. But it is a watchable flick. I watched it with my kids. My kids really enjoyed it. The problem is that it was syrupy sweet, right? The way that the critics like children's films to be addressed is taking on deeper issues. And this film basically said it's good to be, this film does have one of my favorite scenes in any movie ever. It does have one phenomenal scene. So it has a bunch of scenes that are like, There's one scene that is just terrific in which Robin Williams discovers his happy thought, and his happy thought, after he's had all these terrible things happen to him throughout his childhood, his happy thought is his kids, right? His happy thought is having children, which as a parent, like, you want to get the waterworks going. That happens to be the case.
My happy thought.
Naturally, many of the critics didn't like it, not just because they thought it was overlong, which is fair, but because they didn't like some of the general moral values of it. So Brian Johnson from McKellen's Magazine wrote, a $79 million galleon of a movie scheduled to sail into North American theaters on December 11th, Hook has everything Hollywood currently holds dear: precocious children, regressive adults, and an unabashed nostalgia for old-fashioned family values. Nostalgia for the nuclear family is everywhere. Hollywood seems infatuated with the theme of family harmony. Well, that would be a terrible thing. I mean, if Hollywood, the good old days, right, when Hollywood actually cared about family harmony and the idea that a kid needed a mom and a dad, and the dad should be involved, and that kids need a father who is involved, and that fathers need to act with imagination but also set standards, like very bad stuff. So a lot of the critics didn't like it. Of course, this is a beloved film for a lot of people of my generation. Okay, so Noah. I remember seeing this and being appalled. Like, as somebody who's a Bible believer and as somebody who takes very seriously the story of Noah and actually thinks that the text is quite telling about what exactly human beings did wrong to piss off God, I will say that Noah is a blasphemous piece of heretical nonsense. Noah is made by Darren Aronofsky, perhaps my least favorite filmmaker of all time. I think Darren Aronofsky may be the most overrated filmmaker of the modern era. He's truly bad. Like, I think he just makes bad films. And not only does he make bad films, they're filled with bad ideas. So this particular film is recasting the story of Noah, 76% on Tomato Meter, 41% audience score. The reason for that is because basically Noah turns into a possibly child-murdering barbarian living among people who are environmental despoilers. So the problem in Noah is not that the earth is filled with corruption, as it says in the Bible. The problem is that human beings are despoiling the environment. They're mining, right? They're doing bad things like having mines, and they're wrecking the environment, which is not what the story of Noah is about. When it says that evil filled the earth and every man did what was good in his eyes, they're not talking about environmental despoilation or overpopulation, okay? That is not what they are talking about. And then it's filled with all sorts of weird mythical references that don't make any sense. Darren Aronofsky has like giant monsters, giant rock monsters that sort of emerge. I remember seeing a screening of this and being like, I don't know what he is doing right now, but I kind of know what he's doing, and that is he's turning this story into, instead of a referendum on godly values, he's turning it into a referendum on environmental values. And he basically said that. He basically said that he was obsessed with the story of Noah because it was all about environmental stewardship, which of course it 100% is not. Okay, finally, there's Hillbilly Elegy, 27% on Rotten Tomatoes, 86% audience score. And again, the big problem that critics had with this thing is that it was about people who are purportedly conservative, even though they're not conservative, and they don't want white working class people understood. They think that that is very bad, that you should never have a movie about white working class people. In fact, Hollywood has said this, right? They say pretty openly that they don't believe that movies should be made about males, particularly, who are white and working class. It's not like the Oscars have to have a certain level of diversity in your plot in order for these films to be featured. The film is fine. In many ways, I think the film is good. It has a lot of good performances. I think Ron Howard strips out all the politics, and the media just wouldn't let him do it. Here's the thing. If you want to stand up to the cultural elite, I'm talking about the people who make these movies, I'm talking about the critics who criticize these movies, and the legacy media, head on over to dailywire.com/subscribe right now. If you enjoyed this, hit that thumbs up. Make sure that you are subscribed. Thank you for tuning in.